Hi, I'm Todd Goodwin. I want to discuss a very common issue that I see in my practice as a hypnotist, and that is emotionally compulsive behaviors, or more importantly, emotionally compulsive habits. So, what is that? Well, let's take a step back. What is a habit? A habit is anything that you do automatically through repetition, and it's something that's learned. It can be an emotional habit like having an anger outburst. It could be a physical habit like turning off the light before you go to bed. Now, in the case of turning off the light, there's no emotion involved and it's not compulsive, it's just a habit. But by doing it again and again, you begin to feel like there's a need to do it. And then when we get into the issues that I work with in my practice, which would be someone who smokes and has trouble quitting, someone who feels like they have to overeat even though they're full, someone who drinks too much even though they know they should abstain from it, or people who can't seem to stay away from behaviors like gambling or being on the internet all the time. These become emotionally compulsive habits. Habits that when you're not doing them, you feel some emotional discomfort, like you have this attachment that you've been ripped away from, and the only way to feel peace of mind is to go back and engage in it. So the structure of a compulsion is when you have this internal conflict that's highly charged emotionally between your conscious and subconscious. The logical, rational part usually will say, if it's an unhealthy habit, will say, don't do it, it's bad for you, for a whole host of reasons. But the subconscious emotional part says, but I need to. That's the emotional compulsion. And so they go back and forth fighting, and I can tell you this, the subconscious is much, much more powerful. The only tool we have at the conscious level is willpower. And I know you've been in a situation before in the past where there was something you knew you shouldn't do, but you felt like you had to do it. And you might have temporarily been able to stop yourself. Maybe you're trying to eat healthy and lose weight, and someone serves this really delicious looking dessert or ice cream or cheesecake or something, and you might be able to have one bite and stop yourself. You might even say, no, I don't want the dessert menu. But that's only going to work temporarily, and it's only going to work so far until eventually the willpower gives out and your underlying subconscious drive, the compulsion, overpowers it. And that's why when people try to diet or restrict themselves, eventually that gets exhausted and then they overdo it and then they end up gaining all the weight back. This is one reason why using willpower to change habits is usually a failure waiting to happen. So when you have this internal conflict between conscious and subconscious, and the subconscious creates emotion, it's actually based on the underlying belief that you need that thing to be okay. A common example would be, let's just say this could be one way of starting a compulsion or developing one, would be if you're sitting there working on a project and you're feeling stressed. And instead of dealing with that stress effectively, you get up and you go eat something. Now, eating that thing makes you feel good, not only because there might be some sugar or something inherently pleasurable like flavor to the food, but also because you're giving credit to the food for helping you distract or escape from that stressful activity. So what happens is, from that first time, you begin to learn, and you may not be aware of this at all. Most people are not aware when they're developing a compulsion. You learn that eating that food is going to help me feel good, especially when I'm feeling stressed. And then after that's reinforced several times, there's this expectation of subconsciously, when you're stressed doing that project or stressed in general, there's the expectation that you're going to eat something that will make you feel good. And then the urge, the emotional drive to do it, comes up. Now, it's ultimately fed by the thought or belief that you learned. You weren't born that way. You learned through trial and error and repetition that you need that food in order to feel better. Now, obviously, we know that's not really fixing the underlying issue, but most compulsions are simply unhealthy distractions. And as long as you feel a compulsion to do something, you're not truly free. And of course, probably almost by definition, a compulsion is an emotional compulsion. Now, when people ask me, am I addicted or is it just a bad habit? I usually like to sidestep that. The word addiction is overused and there's a lot of baggage associated with it. But things like smoking, drinking too much, overeating, gambling, you can safely call those emotional compulsions or emotionally compulsive habits. The way to solve it, which is actually fairly simple, it can be an involved process, but it's pretty straightforward. The way to solve it, the way to neutralize and collapse the compulsion, to dissolve it so it's gone, and to break that habit for good, is to communicate effectively. I use hypnosis and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, to communicate effectively with the subconscious, to teach it that it doesn't need whatever that habit or behavior is in order to be okay. The subconscious is trying to protect you and to help you feel good, to help you go from uncomfortable to comfortable. When we teach it that it doesn't need that object or that substance or that behavior anymore, or in some case that person, right? Then the drive to have it goes away. The feeling that you need it is gone. The craving is gone. The obsessive thinking is gone. And the habit is gone. Then you actually have free will, once again, and you're in charge of your own well-being and your own actions instead of being driven like something is possessing you. One last thing I'll leave you with is that many times when people have a compulsion, they think about it as having an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and the angel part is saying, don't do it, it's bad for you. And the devil says, come on, don't be so hard on yourself, live a little, enjoy. And so the key to resolving that compulsion is to end the internal debate and basically get the two parts, conscious and subconscious, to make a mental handshake. Once that happens, there's relative calm and inner peace as much as humanly possible. There's congruency towards a goal, and there's mental clarity. Once that happens, you don't need to force yourself to do something. It just happens automatically. And you also don't need to avoid those triggers anymore because the underlying thought and feeling that you need it is gone. So next time you find yourself struggling with some habit or compulsion or behavior, ask yourself, what's really driving it? And also, what are you really distracting yourself from to go from unpleasant to pleasure? Think about that and do your best to free yourself from the trap of these emotional compulsions.